A werewolf romance, written by Olivia Smith. There is something they never tell you about being buried alive. It is not the dirt. It is not the darkness, though the darkness is absolute. The kind that presses against your open eyes like a physical thing, like a hand over your face. It is not even the weight of the earth above you, though that weight is enormous and intimate and wrong in a way your body understands before your mind does. The thing they never tell you is what it does to your hands. By the 3rd month, my fingernails were gone. By the 6th, my fingertips had built new skin, thicker, ridged the texture of bark from the endless clawing upward through packed earth. By the 1st year, I had stopped feeling the scraping entirely. My hands had simply accepted this as their purpose. To claw, to climb, to refuse. Every full moon. 12 times a year. For as long as they needed to prove I was nothing. I clawed every single time. Until the night I didn't. Until the night the earth above me opened, not from my hands, but from his. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching, whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Chapter 1. The night I stop clawing. The earth smells different on a full moon night. I do not know if others notice this. I have never been able to ask. But from inside the ground, from beneath it, from the narrow wooden box, they lower me into each month with the efficiency of people who have made a ritual of something grotesque. The soil has a particular smell on full moon nights. Wet iron, green and deep and alive in a way that feels cruel when you are the thing being pressed beneath it. My name is Zivah Maren Solke. I am 22 years old, and I have been buried alive 11 times. Tonight is the 12th. The box they use is pine. Rough cut, unfinished, with gaps between the planks wide enough to admit thin threads of cold air and, on clear nights, the faintest suggestion of moonlight filtered through 6 feet of packed earth. I know every grain of its interior. I have mapped it with my fingertips in the dark more times than I can count. The knot on the left side panel, the long split running up the right wall, the place near the hinge where the wood has begun to soften from repeated contact with damp soil. It is 3 feet wide, 6 feet long, 2 feet deep. The chain around my left ankle is attached to a bolt sunk into the base. 14 inches of slack, enough to shift position, not enough to brace properly for the climb. They give me 1 hour. 1 hour from the moment the earth is shoveled back over the lid to prove, by surviving, by clawing my way out, by breaking the surface and gasping in the moonlit air above the burial ground on the eastern edge of Solke territory, that I am nothing, that I carry no wolf, that the thing my mother whispered over my cradle was a lie, or a wish, or a madness. If I were a wolf, they say, the shift would come in the dark. The wolf would tear the box apart. The wolf would dig through 6 feet of earth in minutes on a full moon night, compelled by instinct too powerful to resist. If I claw my way out as a human, bleeding and slow and desperate, I have proven I carry nothing. This is the test. This is the proof. This is the ritual they have performed on me every month for a year, each time concluding with the same recorded verdict. No wolf present. Clawed free as human. Test inconclusive pending next cycle. Inconclusive. 11 months of inconclusive, and still they bury me again. But tonight is different. Tonight, from the moment they lowered the box into the ground and shoveled the first load of earth over the lid, something in my body has been wrong. Not the usual wrong. The compressed panic, the controlled terror, the fierce and necessary narrowing of focus to the single task of surviving. Something else. Something lower and quieter and more absolute. I am tired. Not the tiredness of a bad night's sleep. The tiredness that lives in a place beyond sleep, below rest, in the structural foundations of a person. The tiredness of a body that has been asked to endure the same impossible thing 12 times, and has finally, quietly, sent up a signal from somewhere deep in its machinery. Enough. I press my palms against the lid of the box. The earth above is silent. No, not silent. Full of tiny sounds. The movement of roots. The distant shift of groundwater. The faint percussion of the burial ground's surface, where I know the witnesses are standing in a half circle. Counselor Bryn, Elder Vasht, 2 scribes, and whoever else my father has brought tonight to watch the performance and confirm the verdict. My father, Lord Edric Solke, who authorized the first burial, who signed the protocol document with his careful, practiced signature, who stood at the graveside last month and looked down into the hole before they closed it and said nothing, who has not spoken my name directly in over a year. I press my palms harder against the lid. The familiar protocol begins in my mind. Find the weakest point in the wood, work the split in the right wall, build leverage from the hip rather than the shoulders, angle the pressure toward the corner where the hinge has softened, and then it stops. My hands go flat. My eyes, open in the absolute dark, stare upward at the lid I cannot see. For the first time in 11 months, my hands do not begin. I do not know how long I lie there. The compressed air in the box is warm from my breathing, and thin enough that I'm already rationing it instinctively. Long, slow breaths, rather than the panicked, shallow ones that waste everything. The chain around my ankle is cold. My fingertips, those thick-ridged, bark-textured fingertips that have forgotten what ordinary skin feels like, are pressed flat against the wood and still. The hour is passing. I know this not from any clock, but from the quality of my own oxygen. The way it thickens slightly as the box's air supply depletes. The faint heaviness at the edges of consciousness that signals time. Get up, something says in my mind. Start. You have done this 11 times. You know how. Start. But the tiredness does not answer to this, and my hands do not move. Above me, I become aware, faintly, from the vibration conducted through 6 feet of earth, of movement. Boots on the surface. More than the usual number. Heavier and faster. Voices, too low to distinguish through the earth, but the rhythm of them wrong. Not the patient, watchful quiet of the witnesses, but something urgent. Something has changed above. The earth vibrates differently, sharper, like impact, like digging. I do not allow myself to hope. I have learned, the hard way, in the 3rd month, when I spent 40 minutes certain I heard someone coming, before understanding it was simply the groundwater shifting, not to assign narrative to vibration. But the digging does not stop. It comes faster. The impact pattern of it is not a shovel. It is hands, large and systematic, and underneath the hands, occasionally, something harder. And the earth above me is shifting. Actually shifting, the packed weight of it lightening degree by degree, the lid of the box trembling slightly under the reduced pressure. My hands finally moved, not to claw, but to press upward. Ready. The earth gave way. The lid came free. Cold night air, vast and cold, and full of pine and frost, and the enormous smell of the world after a year of dirt, poured into the box like water, and I gasped with my whole body, and above me, framed against the full moon sky, was a face. Not my father, not the council, not anyone I had ever seen. A man I did not know, on his knees at the edge of the grave, with earth on his hands and on his jaw and in his dark hair, looking down at me with an expression that had no politics in it, no performance, no careful arrangement, just fury. Clean and white-hot, and directed entirely at the people standing behind him in the burial ground's half-circle. He reached into the box with both hands. "Give me your hands," he said. His voice was low and absolutely controlled, and in it was something I felt in my sternum, the resonance of it, the frequency, like a note struck on a string you did not know was taut. I gave him my hands. He lifted me from the ground as though the chain on my ankle was an afterthought, and the 6 feet of earth between me and the surface was a minor inconvenience. and when the chain pulled taut, he looked at it once, just once, and then looked at the man holding the bolt key in the half-circle of witnesses with an expression that made the man take 2 steps backward before he decided to move. The key was produced. The chain was removed. I stood in the moonlit burial ground of Solke territory, on shaking legs, with the cold air around me, and the full moon above me, and the grave open at my feet, and the man who had dug me out was standing 2 steps away with earth on his hands, watching me with those furious, winter-dark eyes. Behind him, the half-circle of witnesses had gone very quiet. "Who?" said Counselor Bryn, recovering his official voice. "Are you?" The man turned, and on his chest, on the riding jacket now stained with Solke earth, a crest, silver on black. A crest that made Bryn's voice die in his throat and made Elder Vashti take a step backward and made the 2 scribes look at each other with the specific expression of people calculating how quickly they can leave. I knew that crest. Everyone in the Northern Territories knew that crest. My legs, which had carried me through 11 full moons of burial and climbing and survival, chose this moment to make their position clear. They buckled. The man caught me before I reached the ground. "I have you," he said, and the night, for the first time in a year, did not feel like something I had to survive alone. Chapter 2. The girl they decided was nothing. I was born under a full moon. My mother told me this the way other mothers tell their children they were born in springtime, or during a storm, or just as the sun came up, as a detail that carries meaning, that explains something, that threads the child back into the larger fabric of the world. She told me, sitting on the edge of my bed when I was 7, her hand on my hair, her voice low and warm and deliberate. "The moon was full the night you came," she said. "Completely full. I saw it through the window while you were arriving. It was the color of bone, and it filled the whole frame of the glass." "What does that mean?" I asked. She looked at me for a moment. "It means," she said carefully, "that you belong to something larger than this room. She died when I was 9. A fever, swift and merciless, that took her in 4 days and left behind a husband who had loved her completely and did not know how to reconfigure himself around her absence, and a daughter who spent the following years running her mother's words through her mind like river stones, smoothed by repetition, their edges worn away, their essential weight preserved. You belong to something larger than this room. My name is Zivah Maren Solke, second and only surviving child of Lord Edric Solke, who governs the Eastern Solke territory on behalf of the Dreven Regional Council. My brother Cassin died at 4 from the same fever strain that took my mother years later. Another thing my father has never discussed, another closed door in a house that sometimes felt like nothing but closed doors. The Solke family carries wolf blood. This is not unusual in the Northern Territories, where old bloodlines run deep and the division between human-born and wolf-born has been blurring for generations. What matters is the expression, whether the blood activates, whether the wolf manifests. In most families with wolf heritage, the blood lies dormant for generations, then surfaces without warning in 1 child in 100. The children it surfaces in are valuable, sought after, bonded to packs or territories with contracts that carry significant social and material weight. My father's older brother expressed the wolf. He had been a powerful mid-rank wolf, bonded to a regional pack, who had died in a border conflict 20 years ago and left my father, the human-born younger brother, as the Solke heir. My father had spent his entire adult life as the lesser Solke, the human one, the one the pack respected but did not defer to, the one who administered territory but sat below the salt at any gathering of ranked wolves. He had married my mother, Linara, from a small family with strong wolf heritage, precisely because of what her bloodline might give his children. And then Cassin died, and I remained, and I showed no sign. By the time I was 16, the absence of wolf expression in me was a quiet embarrassment in the Solke house. Not spoken of directly, my father was too controlled for direct speech about things that shamed him, but present in the architecture of every conversation, in the particular way he looked at me across dinner tables, in the quality of silence that fell when other noble families discussed their wolf-born children, and my father had nothing to contribute. I was 20 when the rumors started. I do not know who began them. I have theories. The Solke territory borders 3 other noble estates, and border politics in the eastern region had been shifting for years, tilting toward a consolidation that would benefit families with strong wolf-born heirs and disadvantage those without. Someone had interest in questioning the legitimacy of my father's line, in suggesting that the Solke heritage was exhausted, the blood thinned past utility. The rumor, when it reached me through the household, was specific, that my mother had carried wolf blood of unusual potency, that it had not been passed to me in the ordinary way, dormant, absent, but was present and suppressed, actively held down, that I was, in fact, wolf-born and concealing it. The logic behind this was insulting in its poverty. Why would I conceal the one thing that would elevate my position, secure my future, and restore my father's standing in a single revelation? No answer was offered. The rumor did not require logic. It required only repetition. But my father heard it. And something in my father, the man who had spent 40 years as the lesser Solke, who had watched his wolf-born brother take every room he entered, who had built his entire hope for restoration on a daughter who had not delivered, latched onto it. Not because he believed I was hiding a wolf, because believing it meant the story was not over. If I was suppressing, the wolf was still there, still possible, still a door that had not closed. He brought it to the regional council the winter I turned 21. I do not know exactly what he said. I was not in the room. But the outcome was a protocol. Formal, documented, signed by Councillor Bryn and Elder Vasht and my father. The Solke Full Moon Verification Protocol. Once per full moon, I would be interred in the burial ground for 1 hour. The theory, such as it was, held that the full moon was the maximum pressure point for wolf expression. That if a wolf was present and suppressed, the combination of full moon stimulus and survival urgency would override the suppression and force the shift. If I emerged human, the test was inconclusive. If I shifted, it would be documented, and the Solke line would be formally designated wolf-bearing. I was not asked whether I consented. I was told the date of the first burial 2 weeks in advance. My father came to my room the night before, and stood in the doorway and said, with his careful, controlled face, "It will not take long. If there is anything in you to find, it will show itself quickly." I looked at him. "And if there is nothing?" I said. He did not answer. He left. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my hands and thought about my mother's voice saying, "You belong to something larger than this room," and I tried to understand how the room had become so small. The first burial lasted 47 minutes before I clawed my way free. I stood in the moonlit burial ground, gasping, with dirt in my mouth and my fingernails split to the quick, and I was human in every way that could be observed or measured. The scribe wrote, "Inconclusive. The second month. 44 minutes. Inconclusive. The third. 49. Inconclusive." My father watched each one from the edge of the half-circle with his controlled face and his careful eyes, and after each one he said nothing to me, and after each one the silence between us acquired another layer, another sediment of unspeakable things. By the 6th month, I had stopped trying to speak to him at all. By the 11th, the only thing keeping me clawing was the understanding that stopping would mean they had won, that every inconclusive verdict, every month I surfaced human and gasping and undeniable, was its own form of resistance. Until tonight, until my hands lay flat in the dark and would not begin, and the earth above me opened. Chapter 3. The King in the Burial Ground. His name was Cadron Wolf. I learned this not from introduction. Introductions do not happen in burial grounds, or not the ordinary kind, but from Councillor Bryn's voice, which broke on the second syllable in a way that told me everything I needed to know about the power differential at work. Cadron Wolf, the Alpha King of the Draven Northern Territories, who had arrived at the Solke estate 3 hours ago, unannounced, as was apparently his practice during inspection tours, and had been given a room and a formal dinner, and a great deal of anxious hospitality by my father, who had not mentioned to his royal guest that his daughter was currently being interred in the Eastern burial ground as part of a monthly ritual. I was wrapped in someone's riding cloak, his, I would realize later, because he had taken it from his own shoulders and put it around mine in the same efficient motion he might use to hand someone a tool. And I was sitting on the ground at the edge of the open grave because sitting was currently the maximum my legs were prepared to contribute, and I was watching the scene in front of me with the particular clarity that sometimes comes after extreme physical stress, when the mind strips everything down to its essential structure. Cadron Wolf was speaking to Counselor Bryn. He was not shouting. This was notable. The quality of his anger was not hot. It was cold, compressed, the kind of anger that has been through many iterations and arrived at precision. Each sentence landed like something measured. Every word was chosen. "Walk me through the authorization," he said. "Who signed the protocol?" Bryn produced the document with trembling hands. Cadron took it, read it with the focused speed of someone accustomed to processing documents under pressure. "Lord Edric Solke," he said. "Counselor Bryn, Elder Vasht." He looked up. "None of you have regional authority to establish a physical trial protocol without Draven court review." "The procedure was therapeutic in intent," Bryn began. "She was in a box under 6 feet of earth with a chain around her ankle," Cadron said. "Identify the therapeutic element." Bryn did not identify it. I watched my father from across the burial ground. He was standing at the outer edge of the half-circle in his good coat, which he always wore for the burials, some form of official behavior, as though proper dress made the proceedings less grotesque, and his face was doing the thing it did when he was calculating. Not panicking, calculating, assessing the new landscape, and determining what position to occupy within it. He met my eyes across the burial ground. Something moved in his face. Something I was not prepared for. Not the controlled assessment, but something beneath it. Something cracked and sudden, and quickly covered, like a window that opens for a second in a sealed building and then is pulled shut. I looked away first. Cadron had finished with Bryn and was crouching in front of me again. Not standing over me, crouching, so that we were at eye level, which was deliberate. I recognized deliberateness by then. I had been surrounded by deliberate men for a year, men who chose their positions carefully, who arranged themselves for effect. His deliberateness had a different quality. It was not for my benefit exactly. It was simply how he moved through the world, with the same care toward a stranger on a burial ground floor as toward anything else that required his attention. "Can you stand?" he asked. "Give me another minute," I said. "Take 2, he said. I looked at him directly for the first time. In the moonlight, with earth still on his hands and jaw, he was striking was the word that came to mind, though not in the conventional way. His face had the quality of landscape that has been shaped by weather, strong, definite, with the particular character that comes from being tested. The scar through his left brow was old and silver in the moonlight. His eyes were the kind of dark that held the moon's reflection without being lightened by it. "You dug," I said. "Yes." "With your hands." The shovel was on the wrong side of the burial ground, and the situation was urgent. I looked at his hands, the earth under his fingernails, the slight rawness of the palms where he had driven them into packed soil repeatedly. A king with earth on his hands, crouched at the edge of a grave, explaining his tool choice with the practicality of a man who solved the problem in front of him and did not pause for ceremony. "How did you know?" I said. "Know what?" "That I had stopped clawing." He was quiet for a moment. In the burial ground around us, the scene was still proceeding. Roven, his intelligence officer, was collecting documents from the scribes. 2 of his guards had positioned themselves between the witnesses and the exit in a way that was not quite blocking it, but made the option less comfortable. My father had not moved from his position at the outer edge. "I was shown to my room," Cadron said. "I reviewed the estate layout, as I do with any building I'm placed in. The map showed an eastern ground designated as burial territory. In active use." He paused. I asked the household steward what was buried there. He told me it was animals. The answer was too quick. Another pause. I went to look. You came to a burial ground in the middle of the night because a steward answered too quickly, I said. Yes. That is... I stopped. What? A very particular way to move through the world, I said. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The topography of one. Yes, he said. I've been told. He stood and held out his hand, and I took it and let him pull me upright, and this time my legs held. I stood in the moonlit burial ground with his cloak around my shoulders and the full moon above, the same moon that had presided over 11 identical nights, patient and indifferent. And I felt something that I had not felt in a year. Witnessed, not observed, not assessed, not watched for evidence. Witnessed. As in, I see you. I see what this is. I am not going to look away. Behind me, the grave was still open. The loose earth piled at its edges. The pine box visible at the bottom with the broken chain still attached to the bolt. In front of me, my father had finally moved. He was walking toward us across the burial ground with his careful face and his good coat, and in his eyes was the calculation, and beneath the calculation, again, that cracked and covered thing. Cadron turned. He looked at my father, and the expression on his face, not cold, not theatrical, but utterly precise, made Lord Edric Solke stop walking before he had reached us. Tomorrow morning, Cadron said quietly, we will speak. Tonight your daughter sleeps in a room with a fire and a door that locks from the inside. He paused. If anyone enters that room without her permission before morning, I will consider it an act of interference with a royal investigation. My father said nothing. He stood in his good coat in the moonlit burial ground, and he said nothing, and in his silence was everything he had never been able to say. All the things that had built the closed doors in the Solke house, all the things he had pressed down and formalized and turned into protocol. I walked past him without speaking. Cadron walked beside me, and behind us the open grave caught the moonlight, empty at last, and in the morning someone would fill it in. I intended to make sure it was never opened again. Chapter 4. What the Moon Knows. There are things I learned in 12 months of full moon burials that I would not have learned any other way. I do not offer this as justification. I offer it as fact, with the precision I have developed for facts, the ability to state them plainly, without the additional weight of what I wish they were. The first thing, my body is more resilient than I knew. Before the first burial, I had an ordinary person's relationship with my own physical capacity. I understood it academically. I knew I was reasonably strong, that I had good endurance from years of riding and the outdoor work of estate management, but I had never tested it against anything that mattered in the way that survival matters. The burials introduced me to a version of myself that had no patience for limitation. That version clawed through packed earth with broken fingernails and did not stop to assess the damage. That version rationed air with the efficiency of someone who understood exactly how much they had left. That version existed in a quiet, ferocious conversation with death every month for a year, and won 11 times before asking for rest. I have a great deal of respect for that version. I did not know she was in there. The second thing, silence is its own language, and I had become fluent in it. The Solke house had been silent in specific ways since my mother died. The silence of a man who did not know how to grieve aloud. The silence of rooms that had arranged themselves around an absence. I had grown up inside that silence, and assumed I understood it. The burials taught me there were dialects I had not studied. The silence of the witnesses above. The silence of my father's face. The silence of a council that signed documents and called it procedure. These were not the silence of grief. They were the silence of people who had agreed, collectively, not to see what they were doing. That kind of silence I understood now completely. The third thing, and this one I held most carefully, turned over most often in the dark of the box with the earth pressing above me. Something was waking up. Not the wolf they were looking for. Not a shift, not a transformation, not the physical manifestation they expected, and documented and found absent month after month. But something else. Something interior. A quality of awareness that had not been present before the burials began, that seemed to deepen each time I went under and returned. I am not superstitious. I am my father's daughter in at least one way. I preferred documented reality to wishful interpretation. But there are things that happen to a body under extreme and repeated duress that do not fit neatly into documentation. My senses had sharpened. Not dramatically, not in any way that would have been observable to an outside witness, but in ways I noticed privately. The smell of the earth had become informative rather than merely present. I could feel changes in air pressure through the packed soil in ways that I had no prior framework for understanding. Sounds that had previously been indistinct had begun to differentiate. I did not tell anyone. Not because I was suppressing, as the rumor alleged, but because I did not know what to make of it myself, and because anything I reported would be used as evidence for the protocol's continuation. So I kept it inside, and I cataloged it privately, and I clawed my way out 11 times, and on the 12th I lay still, and a man I had never met came and moved the earth. The room Cadron had arranged for me was in the west wing of the Solke house, away from my own rooms, I noticed, which were in the east wing close to the burial ground. Whether this was intentional on his part, I could not say. But I noticed it. It had a fire. A real fire, not the small managed thing my rooms permitted, but a generous fire that made the room warm in the deep, structural way that changes how a space feels. Not just the air temperature, but the quality of being in it. I sat in front of it, wrapped in a blanket that someone had left on the chair, and I ate the food that had appeared on the small table beside it, bread, and something warm in a cup and cold meat, and I listened to the house around me. My father's study was directly below. I could hear, conducted faintly through the floor, the sounds of him in it. A chair, papers, the particular sound of a man who was not sleeping, who was sitting in a room in the middle of the night with his thoughts. I knew that sound. I had sat below his study many times as a child and heard it, those long insomniac nights that followed every significant event in the Solke house, my father communing with whatever interior landscape he carried and could not share. I thought about his face in the burial ground, the cracked and covered thing. My mother had loved him. Genuinely, completely. I had been old enough before she died to understand the quality of it, the particularity of her attention to him. She had seen something in him that he himself seemed to have misplaced over the years. Something that could be reached, that could open. I wondered if it was still in there, buried the way some things are buried, not gone, just covered by the accumulated weight of years. A knock at the door. "It's Cadron Wolf," said the voice. "I have a question if you're awake." "Come in," I said. He came in with the same quiet efficiency that seemed to characterize all his movement, closing the door behind him, reading the room briefly, choosing the other chair rather than the one closer to the fire, because I was in the closer one, and he was not the kind of person who rearranged other people's spaces. He sat. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. 12 months, I said. Tonight was the 12th. His jaw tightened. Not dramatically. The kind of tightening that happens when controlled people encounter something that requires control to remain controlled. "Did you have legal representation at the signing of the protocol?" "No." "Were you informed of your right to contest it?" "I was told the date of the first burial." The jaw tightened further. "When I came through the burial ground tonight," he said, "the box was sealed and the earth was packed." "How long had you been under?" "I don't know exactly," I said. "The air was thinning. Perhaps 40 minutes. "You were not clawing," he said. "No." "Why?" I looked at the fire for a moment. "Because I was tired," I said. Not frightened, not giving up, just finished with the particular energy that clawing requires. My body made its position clear. He looked at me for a long moment. "You have been surviving this alone for a year," he said. "Yes." "Is there anyone in the household?" "No," I said. "The staff follow my father's lead. The protocol is official. No one is going to position themselves against an official document to assist a burial subject. He accepted this without the performance of outrage that some people would have offered. He simply integrated it, added it to what he knew, adjusted his understanding accordingly. "Tomorrow morning, I will speak with your father," he said. "The protocol will be terminated. The documents will be confiscated for court review. What happens after that depends on what he tells me." "He will tell you what he believes," I said. "He genuinely believes there is a wolf in me. He is not performing it. He needs it to be true." "Why?" I told him about my uncle, about the lesser Solke, about the 40 years of being the human-born son in a wolf-bearing family, and what that had done to my father's architecture, and how I had become the last repository of the hope he had never been able to let go of. Cadron listened in the way he always listened, entirely, without rush. When I finished, the fire had settled lower. The house was quiet below. "He has made you carry something that was never yours to carry," Cadron said. "Yes," I said. "Do you understand that?" "I do now," I said. "I didn't always." He was quiet for a moment. "The marks on your hands," he said. "May I see them?" I held them out. He took them. Both hands, turned them over, looked at the fingertips with their ridged and bark-like skin, the healed splits at the nail beds, the particular callous pattern of someone who has driven their hands repeatedly into resistance. He held them for a moment without speaking. Then he set them gently back in my lap and stood. "Sleep," he said. "I will handle the morning." "You don't know what you're walking into with my father," I said. "No," he said, "but I know what I walked into tonight." He paused at the door. "That is sufficient." He left. I sat in the warm room with the low fire and my bark-textured hands in my lap, and outside the window the full moon was beginning its descent toward the western hills, and I felt, for the first time in 12 months, that the morning was something other than a countdown to the next burial. It was simply morning. Coming. Chapter 5. What my father built instead of a bridge. My father was already in the formal sitting room when Cadron's guards brought me there at the 7th hour. He was seated in the chair nearest the window, his preferred position in any room, the one that put the light at his back and left others facing it. I had spent my childhood watching him choose this chair without appearing to choose it, the small and constant architecture of a man who managed every environment he moved through. He looked, in the thin morning light, older than I had seen him look before. Not devastated. My father did not devastate visibly, but reduced in some way, as though the night had taken something from the careful framework of him and left the structure slightly smaller. Cadron was standing near the fireplace, which was lit but modest. He had changed from his earth-stained clothes into something clean and dark and plain, the understated dress of a man who did not need his clothing to announce him. Roven was beside him, leather journal in hand, pen ready. I sat in the chair across from my father. We looked at each other. "Lord Solke," Cadron said, "I want you to tell me, in your own words, what the purpose of the protocol was." My father's eyes moved from me to Cadron. "To verify the expression status of my daughter's wolf heritage," he said. "It is a legitimate inquiry under territorial—" "The method," Cadron said. "Tell me about the method." A pause. "The full moon burial protocol is historically documented as a verification tool in—" "In what century?" Cadron said. My father stopped. "The 8th, he said finally. "The 8th century," Cadron said. "Before the Draven Accord, before the rights codification, before the formal prohibition on physical trials without court review." He paused. "You applied an 8th century method to a 21st century legal context and called it legitimate inquiry." My father was quiet. "She could have died," Cadron said. "Any one of those 12 instances could have resulted in asphyxiation, cardiac failure from stress, structural injury from the chain, or simple exhaustion beyond the point of recovery. Did you consider this?" "The protocol included safety." 1 hour, Cadron said. That was the safety measure. 1 hour. My father's controlled face did something small and significant. Not a collapse. He was too practiced for collapse. But a compression inward, like a wall absorbing impact and registering it before returning to its position. "Tell me about your brother," Kadrin said. This landed differently. My father looked up sharply, and for the first time in the morning, for the first time in a long time, the calculation was absent from his eyes. What was there instead was raw and unguarded and old. "My brother," he said, "has nothing to do with this." "I believe he has everything to do with this," Kadrin said without unkindness. "I am not saying this to punish you. I am saying it because I cannot address what happened here without understanding what built it." A long silence. My father looked at his hands. Large hands, like mine. That was one thing we shared, the proportion of the hands, the length of the fingers. He looked at them the way I sometimes looked at mine in the dungeon box, as though searching for information in the architecture of them. "Halvard was 6 years older," he said finally. "He expressed the wolf at 13, full shift on his first full moon. My father, our father, threw a feast. It lasted 3 days. He paused. I expressed nothing. I never expressed anything. I was 11 years old, and I sat at the edge of that feast for 3 days, and I understood, in the way that children understand things that no one has explained to them, what the rest of my life was going to look like next to his. The room was quiet. "I do not offer this as excuse," my father said. His voice had changed. The formality had not left it, but something underneath the formality had opened. "I know what I did to you, Zivah. I have known every month since the first one. I told myself it was legitimate. I told myself the protocol had a sound basis. I told myself..." He stopped. "Tell me what you told yourself," I said. He looked at me. This was the longest we had looked at each other in a year. Possibly longer, possibly the longest since the night before the first burial, when he had stood in my doorway and said, "If there is anything in you to find, it will show itself quickly." "I told myself," he said, "that when you clawed out, you were proving you could, that you were strong, that your mother's blood was in you in ways that were not the wolf." He stopped again. "That you were remarkable, and I was the only person who was not telling you so because I was afraid of what it meant if I admitted it." The fire crackled. I looked at this man, my father, who had built closed doors instead of bridges, who had handed me to a protocol because he could not handle the alternative, who had stood at the edge of 11 graves in his good coat and watched me climb out and written nothing in his own record but inconclusive. And I felt the full complexity of what it is to love someone who has hurt you past the point of easy forgiveness. Not a simple thing, not clean, not resolved by his honesty this morning into something manageable, but real. The love was real, and the hurt was real, and they did not cancel each other out. "She has wolf blood," Kadrin said quietly. My father and I both looked at him. "It is not expressing in the form you were looking for," Kadrin said. "But the sensory development you have been observing as inconclusive evidence is not inconclusive. It is the early stage presentation of a late expressing bloodline. It presents differently in women with this particular heritage." He paused. "I have seen it twice before. In both cases, the expression was complete by 25. The room was absolutely still. "You knew?" I said. "I suspected," he said. "Last night, when I saw you standing in the burial ground, there are physical indicators, if you know what to look for." He looked at my father. "You were looking for the right thing in the wrong way." My father closed his eyes, and something happened to his face that I had not seen since my mother's funeral. The complete failure of the controlled structure, the drop of every wall simultaneously, the expression of a man who has been carrying something wrong for so long that the revelation of it does not feel like relief, but like the moment you discover the weight you've been lifting was always facing the wrong direction. He wept, quietly, without drama. My father, who had not wept at my mother's funeral, who had sat through 11 burials of his living daughter without visible expression, put his face in his large hands and wept. I sat across from him, and I let it happen, and I did not move toward him, and I did not move away. Chapter 6. The Thing That Was Waking. After the meeting in the sitting room, Cadron did 3 things in quick succession. He dispatched Rovan to the regional council office in Vithara with the protocol documents and a letter bearing the Draven seal, formally suspending the Solke full moon verification protocol pending court review. He assigned 2 of his guards, Petra, a compact woman with watchful eyes, and a calm that suggested she had been in significantly worse situations than the present one, and a young man called Dervin, who moved with the careful deliberateness of someone recently promoted and determined to justify it, to my direct vicinity until further notice. And he sent a message to the Draven court, informing them that his inspection tour of the Eastern Solka territory would be extended. The extension was open-ended. I learned this from Petra, who told me the way people tell you things they assume you already know. She mentioned it while she was showing me the room she would occupy, the one adjacent to mine, with the connecting door, and she said the king has extended the tour without inflection, as though it were administrative rather than significant. I thought it was significant. I thought about it while I bathed, a real bath, with hot water and the extraordinary luxury of soap that smelled of something other than stone, and while I sat in a chair by the window of my own room for the first time in months, feeling like a person occupying a space rather than surviving it. My room had not changed while I'd spent the nights of 12 full moons in a box. The books on the shelf were in the same order. My mother's small painted portrait, 3 inches by 4, in a wooden frame that had dried and cracked slightly at the corner, was where I always kept it, on the table beside the bed. The window looked east, toward the burial ground, and for the first time in a year, that eastern view had a different quality. Not menacing, just a direction. I picked up my mother's portrait and sat with it in the window light. She had dark eyes and a quality of warmth that the painter had caught at the expense of technical precision. The face was slightly imprecise in its proportions, but the eyes were extraordinary, warm and specific, and present in a way that good portraiture sometimes manages. She had been 28 when it was painted, 2 years younger than my father at the time. She was smiling at something slightly off-center from the viewer, something that would never be visible to anyone looking at the portrait from the outside. You belong to something larger than this room? I thought about what Cadron had said. The late expressing bloodline, the sensory development, the 2 previous cases he had seen. I turned this over carefully, the way I had learned to turn things over in the dark, without rushing to conclusions, without the luxury of wishful acceleration. If it was true, it changed the shape of everything. Not just the last year, the whole architecture of it. My father's obsession, yes, but also my mother's deliberateness when she told me about the full moon. The way she had held that information and chosen that particular detail out of everything she might have told me. As though she knew, as though she was leaving me something to find later. Had she known? Had she expressed herself? Had she been, in her short life, something other than the human woman from a wolf heritage family that the household records described? I could not ask her. I could not ask my father, who was in his study with his closed doors and his new grief. But the question was alive in me, and it hummed. A knock. "Zivah," Cadron's voice, "are you able to walk? There's something I'd like to show you." I put my mother's portrait back on the table. "Yes," I said. He took me to the eastern edge of the estate, not to the burial ground, but to the tree line beyond it. Specifically to a section of old-growth forest that I had known all my life as a child's playground and a teenager's refuge, and had not visited in 12 months, because reaching it required walking past the burial ground, and I had not been willing to do that. The forest was ancient in the way that northern forests are ancient, not dramatically, not with the obvious grandeur of great trees in storybook illustrations, but with the accumulated quiet of something that has been in one place for a very long time and has absorbed everything that happened around it. We stood at its edge. "What do you smell?" Cadron asked. I looked at him. "Go on," he said. "What do you smell?" I stood in the pale morning light at the edge of the ancient forest, and I opened my senses the way I had learned to open them in the box, not forcing, simply receiving, and I let the information come. Pine, old bark, frost on the upper branches conducting down through the trunks in a cold, clean thread. Beneath the frost, something damp and dark and complex. The underground water table, deep and moving. And beneath that, something else. Layered, multiple, the distinct profiles of animals that had passed through the tree line in the last 12 hours, each with its own chemical signature as precise as a signature on paper. "Deer," I said slowly. 3, no, 4. They moved through 2 hours ago, from northeast to southwest. There is a fox who territories in the northeast section. She came through last night. I paused. Something larger passed through yesterday. Not a wolf. The signature is different. A bear, perhaps, moving south for the season. I stopped. Cadron was watching me. "How long have you been able to do that?" he asked quietly. "Months," I said. "Since around the 4th burial. It built gradually." "Have you told anyone?" "No," he nodded. "The late-expressing bloodline presents exactly this way," he said. "The sensory development comes first. It comes before any physical expression, sometimes years before. The system is coming online in stages." He paused. "The burials accelerated it." "The stress," I said. "The full moon exposure," he said, "combined with the survival urgency. Your body was pushing toward expression every single month and being held back by the suppression mechanism, not a deliberate one, not something you were doing consciously, but a natural one. Your system was not yet ready. It was resisting premature expression. And now," I said. He looked at me. "Now," he said, "I think it is almost ready." I stood at the edge of the ancient forest with the pale sun on my face and the smell of 4 deer and a fox and a southbound bear in my senses and something that had been waking up in me for 12 months, slow and deep and patient, like a river moving under ice, pressed quietly against its last boundary. Not yet, but soon. "What happens when it comes?" I asked. "It will depend on your bloodline's specific heritage," Cadron said. "Late-expressing lines tend to present more powerfully than early-expressing ones. The system has been building pressure." He paused. "You should not be alone when it happens." "I have been alone for 12 months, I said. "I know," he said. And the weight he put on those 2 words, not pity, not performance, but the simple acknowledgement of someone who has heard something and fully received it, made the words feel entirely different from how they had felt when I was the only person saying them. "I will not leave the territory until it resolves," he said, "one way or another." I looked at him. "Why?" I said. He was quiet for a moment, not evasively, thinking. The kind of thinking that deserves its space. "Because I came to a burial ground at midnight," he said finally, "and found something I cannot unknow. And I am not the kind of person who walks away from things he cannot unknow." The morning light moved through the tree line and lay across the burial ground in long, pale bars. I turned away from the burial ground and looked into the forest instead. "Tell me about the 2 other cases," I said. "The ones you saw before." And he did. Chapter 7. What builds between people in quiet rooms. 7 days passed. They were the strangest 7 days of my life, and my life had contained 12 full moon burials, so the bar for strange was not inconsiderable. The strangeness was not dramatic. It was the particular strangeness of ordinary life, resuming after a long interruption, the way the body and the days reorganize themselves around new conditions without making speeches about it. I woke each morning in a room with a fire and a window. I ate meals at a table. I walked the estate, not just the paths adjacent to the burial ground, but all of it, the full extent of the Solke land, in the way that a person who has been confined too long to too small a space walks when the confinement ends. Thoroughly, deliberately, all the way to the edges. Petra accompanied me on these walks. She was an efficient companion, present without being intrusive, conversation without overstaying it. I learned over 7 days that she had been with Cadron's personal guard for 6 years, that she was from a coastal territory in the far north, that she had expressed the wolf at 15 and considered it largely administrative at this point. She talked about it the way people talk about a physical attribute they've integrated so completely, it's stopped being remarkable. "Does it change everything?" I asked her once on the third day, walking the northern boundary of the estate. "Yes and no," she said. "It changes your relationship with your own body significantly. It changes how you move through certain situations. It doesn't change who you are." She paused. "That part is fixed before the wolf comes. The wolf finds you already formed." I turned this over for days. Cadron was present at meals, and in the evenings, and occasionally during the day when his work, the ongoing administrative demands of being a king, which did not pause for extended inspection tours, allowed. He had set up a working space in the Solke house's small library, which I respected both because I had always considered the library the best room in the house, and because it meant he was unlikely to be in it when I wanted to be in it, as he would be working, and I am not capable of sharing a working space with another person without becoming hyper-aware of them in ways that impede reading. This was not, it turned out, how it worked with him. I came to the library on the fourth evening, intending to be alone with a particular book, a natural history of northern wolf bloodlines that I'd been working through methodically, building the framework I should have been given a year ago, and found him there at the large table with documents spread across 2/3 of its surface, writing something with the focused speed of a man for whom writing is a practiced tool rather than a labored one. He looked up. "I'll go," I said. "You don't have to," he said, and returned to his writing. I stayed. I found my book on the shelf where I had left it, and took my usual chair by the east window and read, and he wrote, and the room was quiet, in the way that rooms are quiet when the people in them are both actually doing something rather than performing the doing of it. It was the most comfortable I had been in 12 months. This happened again on the 5th evening, and the 6th. By the 7th evening it had become a thing without being decided. We were both simply in the library in the evenings, and it was not discussed. On the 6th evening, he looked up from his documents at some point and said, "The natural history you've been reading? Which edition?" "Morvan's second," I said. "Avoid the 3rd chapter," he said. His taxonomy on late expressing bloodlines was corrected in the subsequent literature. He had significant sample bias. "Which literature?" he told me. I wrote it down. He returned to his documents. I returned to my book. On the 7th evening, I looked up from my book at some point and found him looking at me instead of his documents, not with the quality of someone who has been caught doing something, but with the direct attention of someone who has made a decision. "What?" I said. "I want to ask you something," he said. "You can decline to answer." "Ask," I said. "When you were in the box tonight, the 12th time, and you stopped clawing, what were you thinking?" I looked at the fire. "I was thinking about my mother," I said, "specifically about the thing she told me when I was 7, about belonging to something larger." I paused. "I was thinking that I had spent a year clawing toward a surface that returned me to the same conditions, that the heroism of clawing was real, but the logic of it had become circular." I paused again. "I was not giving up. I was stopping the wrong motion, waiting for the right one." The fire settled. "And I came," he said. "And you came," I said. A silence, not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that has weight to it. The weight of two people sitting with something that is present in the room and has not been named. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I want to tell it plainly, because I don't have another mode, and I think you prefer plain." "I do," I said. "I have been in this house for 7 days because the situation required it," he said. "And also because I did not want to leave." He paused. "These are 2 separate reasons, and both are true." I looked at him across the library. Cadron Wolf, Alpha King of the Northern Draven Territories, with Earth no longer on his hands, but the memory of it somehow still present in the way I understood his hands, sitting in the library of my family home with documents spread before him, and winter in his eyes, and something entirely unguarded in his expression. "I know," I said. "You know," he said. "I have been reading in this library for 7 evenings," I said. "I am observant." The corner of his mouth moved. "I don't know what this is," I said. "I mean that honestly. I am 22 years old, and I have spent the last year in a box once a month, and I am not a reliable assessor of my own interior landscape at the moment. I need time to be a person in an ordinary way before I can—" I stopped. "Yes," he said. "I know." "You're not going to tell me I don't need time?" "No," he said. "You need time. That is not an obstacle. It is information about what comes next." I looked at him. "What does come next?" I said. "The moon will be full again in 23 days, he said. "I intend to be here for it. Not to bury you, to be present for whatever your bloodline decides to do with 12 months of pressure and a full moon and the first safe conditions you've had for expression." He paused. "After that, we can discuss what next." 23 days. I turned back to my book. After a moment, he turned back to his documents, and outside the library window, the northern night was vast and cold and full of stars, and somewhere in the tree line, the forest was doing what ancient forests do, holding its own long, patient continuity against the weather. Chapter 8. My Father's Apology. On the 9th day, my father knocked on the library door. Cadron had gone to Vithara for a council meeting. The formal suspension of the protocol required his testimony and Rovin's documentation, and it was expected to take most of the day. I was alone in the library with Morvan's natural history and the corrected literature Cadron had identified, building a picture of what my bloodline might be doing from the evidence available when the knock came. "Come in," I said. My father opened the door and stood in the frame the way he had stood in my doorway the night before the first burial, but different. The controlled face was still there, the careful posture, the good coat. But beneath all of it, the structure was softer. Something had been adjusted in the framework of him, and the adjustment was visible in ways that would not have been visible to someone who had not grown up reading his silences. "May I sit?" he said. "Yes," I said. He sat in Cadron's chair, the one across the table from mine, and he folded his hands on the table and he looked at me. "I have been trying for 9 days to find the right words," he said. "I have several versions drafted. I destroyed all of them." "Then say it without the draft," I said. He looked at his hands, then up at me. "I am sorry," he said. "Not in the form of an explanation. I have explanations, but you know them already, and they are not the same as an apology. I am sorry for what I did to you. I am sorry for what I failed to do. The failing is as large as the doing, and I know that. I am sorry that I made you carry something that was mine." He paused. "I am sorry that I was the kind of father who made burial a procedure." The library was quiet. Outside, wind moved through the estate's bare trees. "I know you loved her," I said. He looked up. "I know that what you did came from the wound of who you were before I was born," I said. "I understand the shape of it. I have had 12 months underground to understand it." I paused. "Understanding it does not fix what it did, but it means I can hold both things at once, the understanding and the hurt. They don't cancel each other out." His jaw worked. "No," he said. "They don't." "Did she know?" I said. "My mother, about the bloodline, about what it might do." He was quiet for a moment. "I think so," he said finally. "She never said directly, but she chose to tell you about the full moon the night you were born. She chose that specifically." He paused. "Lenara did not choose anything accidentally." I thought about her eyes in the portrait, the smile off-center from the viewer, directed at something only she could see. "Was she—" I began. "I don't know," he said. "I asked myself that for years, whether she had expressed and concealed it, whether she was protecting something. I never found evidence." He paused, but I also never looked with the right eyes until it was too late to ask. We sat in the library, my father and I, on either side of the table that held the corrected literature and Morvan's natural history and the accumulated 9 days of my effort to understand what I was. and the silence between us was different from any silence we had shared before. Not the silence of closed doors, something more like the silence of a door standing open, the question of whether to walk through it still unanswered, but the fact of the opening undeniable. "She is in you," he said. "I see her every time you—" He stopped. His throat worked. "When you came out of the ground each month, the way you stood afterward, that was her. I knew it every time, and I wrote inconclusive in the record, and I went home, and I could not look at myself in the mirror. I looked at him for a long time. 'Come to the forest with me,' I said. He looked up. 'Tomorrow morning,' I said. 'Come to the tree line. I want to show you something.' He was quiet. 'Zivah.' Not as an apology or a reconciliation or anything that requires a name, I said. Just come and I will show you something, and we will see what it is afterward. He looked at me the way he had looked at me in the burial ground, with the cracked and covered thing fully visible, the weight of a father who had not known how to be one, looking at the daughter he had not known how to see. "All right," he said. He left. I sat in the library alone, and I breathed, and I felt the thing inside me pressing against its last boundary again, closer than it had been the day before, and I put my bark-textured fingertips on the surface of the table, and I held very still. Almost something said, from deep in the structure of me. Almost. Kadrin came back from Vithara in the late afternoon. He came to the library, automatically I noticed, without pause or deliberation, the way people move toward things that have become familiar. And he read my face when he entered. "What happened?" he said. I told him about my father's visit, about the apology, about my mother's choice of words and what my father suspected and could not prove, about the morning invitation to the forest. He listened. When I finished, he sat in his chair I had started thinking of it that way, and he was quiet for a moment. He loved her, he said, and he didn't know how to carry the grief of losing her, except by redirecting it toward what she had left behind. "Yes," I said. "That is a failure," he said, "and it is also human." "Yes," I said, "both at once." He looked at me. "You are very generous," he said, after what he did. "I am not generous," I said. "I am 22, and I do not want to spend the rest of my life inside the worst year of it." I paused. "That is not generosity. That is survival of a different kind." He was quiet. Then, "The protocol suspension is confirmed. The court has opened a formal review. Bryn and Vashti have been summoned to testify. The documents are in evidence. And my father is not the primary subject of the review," he said. "He signed. He will be interviewed. But the council's role in authorizing the method without court review is the primary inquiry." He paused. "He will face consequences. They will not destroy him." I nodded. 14 days to the next full moon, I said. He looked at me. "I know," he said. "I can feel it getting closer," I said. "The thing that is waking. Every morning it is clearer than the night before." "Does it frighten you?" I thought about this honestly. "No," I said. "It feels like remembering something I always knew, not like becoming something new." I paused, like my hands knew the shape of the clawing before I knew why I was clawing. He looked at my hands, and I thought about my mother smiling at something off-center from the viewer, something no one looking at the portrait from the outside could ever see. Perhaps she could see this. Perhaps, wherever she was, she could see her daughter sitting in a library, in the house where she had lived and loved and chosen her words carefully, 2 weeks away from becoming what she had always been. I picked up Morvan's natural history. Kadrin picked up his documents. The library was quiet. Outside, the northern night settled in around the estate, and somewhere in the ancient forest, the deep-rooted dark held its patient continuity, and the full moon built in the distance like a tide. Chapter 9. The Moon Does Not Wait. The night of the full moon arrived without drama. This is the thing about significant nights. They do not arrive with the weight of their significance announced. The morning was ordinary. Frost on the windows, thin light from the east, Petra bringing breakfast with the efficiency that was her permanent mode. The afternoon was ordinary. The library, Morvan's now thoroughly annotated natural history, Cadran's documents, the comfortable silence that had become the shape of our evenings. And then the light changed. Not dramatically. The winter sun simply moved toward the horizon at its usual speed, and the sky went from pale gold to rose to the deep blue of early evening, and I felt it. The moon coming. The way you feel a tide turning even inland. The pressure of something enormous moving into alignment. My hands had been different all day. Not painful. Alive. Intensely, almost uncomfortably alive. The bark-textured fingertips suddenly suffused with sensation after months of numbness. Every surface they touched registering in extraordinary detail. The grain of the table. The rough linen of the page. The cold of the window glass. Everything. Cadran had watched this all day without commenting. When I pressed my palms flat on the library table in the afternoon and held them there, he had simply waited. When I stood abruptly and went to the window and stood with my forehead against the glass for a long moment, he had continued reading. His presence was steady in the way that certain foundations are steady, not dramatically, not with performance, simply structurally reliable. When the sky went full dark and the moon rose, I felt it the way Petra had described, not like something arriving from outside, but like something answering inside, a recognition rather than an event. "It's time," I said. "I know," Cadran said. He had been watching me for the last 10 minutes. "I want to go to the forest," I said. "Not the burial ground. The forest." "Yes," he said. He stood. I looked at him. "You don't have to come," I said. "I know," he said, and did not move toward the door without me. My father was in the corridor when we left the library. He was wearing ordinary clothes, not the good coat. He was standing in the corridor in the way of a man who is not sure whether his presence is welcome, and has come anyway because the alternative is worse. He looked at me, and then at Cadran, and then back at me. "I felt it too," he said quietly, "from my study. The change in the air." I looked at him. "Come," I said. He fell in beside us. We went through the estate, the three of us and Petra and Dervin, a small, improbable company, and across the open ground past the burial ground without stopping. I did not look at it. I looked at the tree line. The full moon was extraordinary. I had seen 11 full moons from a box underground, through 6 feet of packed earth, filtered down to the faintest suggestion of light through the soil. I had seen one, tonight's, from the open air of the burial ground, framed by the open grave, in the first minutes of my recovery, when it had seemed enormous and alien. But those were not seeing. This was seeing. The moon above the ancient forest was the color my mother had described, bone white, completely full, filling the sky above the tree line with a light that was not quite like sunlight, and not quite unlike it, colder and more precise, casting shadows that fell in the wrong direction and turned the familiar landscape of the estate into something older than itself. We stopped at the tree line. I stood at the edge of the forest, and the moonlight came down through the bare upper branches and fell across my hands and my face, and I felt the thing that had been waking up for 12 months arrive at its final boundary and press, and this time there was nothing holding it back. It was not painful. This surprised me. Every account I had read described the first shift as violent, the body's resistance to transformation, the effort of restructuring, the shock of the new form arriving. But this was not violent. It was enormous. It was the largest physical sensation I had ever experienced, bigger than fear, and bigger than cold, and bigger than the particular desolation of a box underground, but it was not violent. It was like a door opening. From the inside, something moved through my body from the core outward. A wave, warm and absolute, that reached every boundary of me and pushed beyond it. and the shape of me expanded and transformed with the patient efficiency of something that had been planning this for a very long time and knew exactly what it was doing. I heard my father make a sound. Not shock, something older. Something that cracked through his chest and out of his mouth before he could shape it into anything controlled. A sound that was grief and relief and recognition all at once. And in it were 20 years of being the lesser son, and 12 months of the wrong kind of hope, and one morning in a library when his daughter had said, "Come to the forest," and given him, without naming it, a reason to. I heard Cadron say nothing. I felt him present, the specific quality of his presence, which I had learned over the past weeks the way you learn the particular sound of a voice you have come to trust. Steady and entirely focused, and not afraid of what was happening. The wolf that arrived was pale, not white, the color of old birchwood, the inside of bark, with darker markings along the spine and above the eyes and at the tips of the ears. Larger than I had calculated from the reading, which noted that late expressing bloodlines tended toward exceptional physical scale. The paws on the frozen ground of the forest's edge were enormous, and the cold air-filled lungs that were significantly larger than the lungs they replaced, and the moonlight fell across pale fur and made it silver. I stood in the tree line in the first form I had ever taken, and everything my senses had been building toward for 12 months, the fragmentary signals, the imprecise awareness, the half-understood impressions of deer and fox and distant groundwater, arrived all at once in full resolution. The forest was not quiet. The forest was extraordinarily, elaborately loud with information. The entire understory was alive with it, the movement of small animals, the water table deep below, conducting its cold signal upward through the root systems, the history of every creature that had passed through the tree line in the last week, written in chemical signatures on bark and leaf and frozen ground. It was like the difference between reading about color and seeing it. I stood in it and simply received it, the way you stand in rain after a long drought and do not run for shelter. Behind me, from what my newly calibrated senses registered as approximately 14 feet, I heard my father sit down on the frozen ground. Not collapse, sit. The deliberate lowering of a man whose legs have made a decision independent of his composure, who has seen something that has reorganized his interior landscape so thoroughly that standing no longer feels structurally warranted. And then I heard him say, quietly, to no one in particular, or perhaps to my mother, wherever she was, "There you are." I turned. He was sitting on the frozen ground at the tree line, with his hands on his knees, and his controlled face entirely gone, replaced by something I had never seen from him before. Not grief, not relief, not the cracked and covered thing, but simple, unmediated wonder. He was looking at me the way my mother had looked at things that mattered, with his whole face. Cadron was standing 3 feet to my father's left, and he was looking at me also. His expression was not wonder. It was something else, quieter and more contained, with a quality that I recognized from the library and the burial ground and the evening conversations in the room with the fire. He was looking at me the way he always looked at things he had decided he could not unknow. I held this for a moment. Then I turned back to the forest, and I ran. Not from anything, not toward anything specific. Into it, into the ancient, patient dark between the trees, into the cold and the moonlight, and the extraordinary sensory world that had been building in me for 12 months, and was now, at last, fully available. The forest received me without ceremony. It did not care that I was late. It did not care that it had taken 12 burials, and one stopped clawing, and one man digging with his hands to get me here. It simply opened, tree by tree, and let me through, and above the bare branches the full moon burned bone white in the winter sky, and my bark-textured paws, mine, the thing my hands had been becoming all along, drove into the frozen ground and pushed, and the speed was something entirely beyond description, and the night was vast and cold, and full of everything. I ran for a long time. When I came back to the tree line, my father was still sitting on the ground. Cadron was sitting beside him. They were not talking. They were simply sitting at the edge of the ancient forest in the moonlight. Two men who had nothing obvious in common, and a great deal of complicated territory between them, waiting for me. I shifted back at the tree line. The return was as smooth as the arrival. The same door, opening from the same direction. My own hands came back, and I looked at them in the moonlight. The bark-textured fingertips, the ridged skin of 12 months of survival, now fully understood. Not the mark of imprisonment. The mark of what I had built while waiting to become what I was. My father got to his feet. He crossed the distance between us and stopped 2 feet away, and looked at me, and his face was still open in that way I had never seen before, and he did not try to close it. "She knew," he said. "Your mother. She knew." "Yes," I said. "I should have." "Yes," I said. "But you didn't. And I'm here." I looked at him. "We're here." He nodded. It was not forgiveness, complete and signed. It was the beginning of the longer work, the years of it, the patient reconstruction of something that had been built wrong and needed to come down carefully before it could be rebuilt right. But it was a beginning. And beginnings, I had learned, were worth more than they looked. Kadrin came to stand beside me and did not touch me and did not speak, and I was grateful for both. The 3 of us walked back across the estate in the moonlight, and behind us the ancient forest held its long continuity, and above us the full moon burned, and it was not a night for burial. It never would be. Again. Chapter 10. What remains when the earth is cleared? Spring comes late to the northern territories. Not reluctantly, that is the wrong word for it, too human a description for what is simply the geography of cold. It comes late the way all true things come, without apology, in its own time, with the specific quality of arrival that belongs to things that cannot be hurried. It was the middle of March when the first thaw came to the Solke estate. I stood at the eastern window of the library in the morning light and watched the frost release its hold on the burial ground, the slow, cellular letting go of frozen earth returning to itself, the soil darkening as the ice left it, the dead grass of winter flattening and beginning in the lowest places where the thaw reached first to suggest the possibility of green. In 3 weeks I had decided that ground would be prepared for planting. Not crops, something else. Something my mother would have chosen. I had been thinking about this since January, running through what I knew of her preferences, and I had arrived at a decision. Wild roses. The kind that grew along the eastern hill roads of the Midlands. The kind that bloomed in the brief northern summer in the particular deep red that has no adequate name. The kind that did not require tending, but rewarded it. The burial ground had been formally decommissioned in January. Court-ordered, documented, sealed. The chain bolt had been removed and the bolt hole filled with new mortar. The pine box had been burned. I had requested this specifically, and Kadrin had arranged it without asking why, the same way he arranged most things, directly and without ceremony. The ash had been scattered. The ground was just ground now. It could become something. The formal review proceedings had concluded in February. Councillor Bryn had been removed from his position and censured by the regional council. Elder Vasht had resigned before the proceedings reached him and retired to his family's estate in the south, which was widely understood to be a form of acknowledgement rather than an exoneration. The documentation of the protocol, all 12 instances, the scribe's records, the official verdicts, had been entered into the court record as evidence of an unauthorized and dangerous physical trial, and added to the codification of prohibited procedures. It would not happen to someone else. Or if it did, there would be a precedent, a name on a document, a case, a record that said, "This is what this is called, and this is what was done about it." My name on a document for something other than a verdict of inconclusive. My father had testified at the proceedings voluntarily. He had not been required to testify in the formal sessions. His legal position was as a signatory, rather than the primary authorizing body, but he had gone to Vithara and sat before the council and told them, in his controlled and careful voice, exactly what he had done, and why, and with what knowledge, and intent. I had not been in the room. I heard the account from Kadrin, who had been. What my father had said, among other things, was this: I knew she was human in the box. I knew it from the second month. The test was not revealing what I hoped it would reveal, and I continued it because stopping it meant accepting the answer, and I was not ready for the answer. This is not the Council's failure. This is mine. I am telling you this because my daughter deserves to have it in the record. The Council had noted it. It would not undo what was done. But it was there now, in the record, the way truth in a record is always there, not changed by what comes before or after it, but permanent. My father and I had not rebuilt everything. This is important to say accurately, without the shape of a story's ending imposed on what was actually a beginning. We had not solved each other. We had not arrived at a clean reconciliation that resolved all outstanding debts. There were still closed doors in the Solke house. There were still silences that had no language yet. But we were building language. Slowly, the way you build anything that has to hold weight, with attention to the foundation, without rushing the parts that need to set. He had come to the forest twice more since the full moon in January. Not to see the wolf, although he had seen it both times, standing at the tree line in the dark with his hands in his pockets and his face open in that new way, but to walk with me. To learn the estate in the way I had relearned it over these months, all the way to the edges, deliberately. We talked on these walks about my mother. Not everything, not all at once, but things, small things, specific things, the remembered architecture of her, the way she held her cup, the particular phrase she used when she was thinking hard, the book she had been reading the week she died, which he had kept, unfinished, on the shelf in his study for 13 years. He gave it to me in February. I was reading it now, slowly, one chapter per evening, in the library. The library. Kadrin had extended his tour 3 times. The regional council, which had presumably expected him back in the Draven court by the new year, had received a series of politely worded communications that cited ongoing territory review requirements and provided no firm return date. Rovan had stopped asking about the return date. Petra and Dervin had settled into the Solke household with the comfortable efficiency of people who have decided not to resist the current situation. In the evenings, the library. In the mornings, sometimes the forest, together or separately, depending on what each of us needed. Kadrin was a wolf of significant rank, expressed at 17, and in the forest he moved with the ease of long familiarity. He did not perform this ease. He simply had it, the way he simply had everything, as a fact about himself rather than an achievement to be demonstrated. We learned each other in the way that people learn each other when they have been placed, by circumstance, in each other's constant proximity, not all at once, not dramatically, but in accumulation. The particular way he went still when something required thought. The specific quality of his humor, which was dry and rare, and when it appeared suddenly and without warning, like a fracture in stone. The fact that he drank his tea too hot and never seemed to notice. The fact that he read the margins of books he found interesting, small, precise annotations in dark ink, and that seeing his annotations in the Solke Library's collection, on books that had been there for years before him, felt like finding evidence of someone you had not yet met. I said this to him once. He looked at the annotation in question, a small correction to a date in a historical account of the Draven border wars, 3 words in his precise handwriting, and then at me. "When was I here?" he said. "The records show a territorial review 7 years ago," I said. "You would have been in the library then?" He looked at the annotation. "I was 26, he said. "I had no reason then to care who used this library afterward." "And now?" I said. He looked at me. "Now," he said, "I care quite significantly." We were in the library when I told him I had decided to come to Draven. Not soon, not immediately, not in the reckless way of people making decisions from the compressed urgency of a moment. In the spring, after the wild roses were planted. after my father and I had enough of the foundation laid, that leaving would not feel like abandonment. After I had finished my mother's book, he listened to the full shape of it. "The library at Draven," he said when I had finished. "You mentioned it," I said. It seemed relevant. "It is significant," he said. "You will have opinions about the cataloging system." "I already have opinions about the cataloging system," I said, "based solely on what you've described." "Of course you do," he said with the dry fracture of humor. "Cadron," I said. He looked at me. "I know what I am coming for," I said. "I want to say that plainly. The library is significant, but it is not the thing." A silence. "I know," he said. "Good," I said. He looked at me across the library table with the winter, dark eyes that held the moonlight without being lightened by it, and in his expression was everything he had decided about me since the night in the burial ground, accumulated and settled, and certain in the specific way that certain people are certain about specific things, not as a performance of conviction, but as a simple statement of their interior landscape. "Spring," he said. "Spring," I said. We returned to our reading. Outside, the estate was moving toward thaw, the slow, patient, unhurried release of winter from soil that had been frozen too long. The burial ground's earth was darkening at the edges, where the warmth reached first, the frost releasing, the ground returning to itself. In 3 weeks I would plant wild roses. In 3 months I would go to Draven. Between now and then, the library. My father's careful new syllables. My mother's unfinished book, chapter by chapter. The forest in the dark, where I ran not from anything, and not toward anything, but simply as myself, enormous and pale, and faster than I had imagined possible, through the ancient trees that did not care when I arrived, only that I did. I was 22 years old. I had been buried 12 times. My hands were bark-textured and scarred, and extraordinary, and mine. And the morning outside the library window was not a countdown to anything terrible. It was simply morning, already becoming what came next. End.